Hi, I'm Andy Mast, Director of Bands at Lawrence University, and I'd like to say just a couple quick words about Frank DeKelly's Cajun folk songs as a preface to the rehearsal video footage that I made with the Lawrence University Symphonic Band in the spring of 2014 to demonstrate some ideas about this piece. There's a lot to like about Cajun folk songs, right? It's a great piece, wonderful melodies, very well orchestrated, everybody has something to do. It's well crafted, harmonically, rhythmically, metrically. There's always something going on and always something interesting going on in the piece. What that means for a teacher, conductor, is the fact that there are always choices to be made. And if I couldn't say anything else about the piece, I think that would be it. That there's simply a lot to process about this piece, more so than many other pieces of a comparable difficulty. Beginning with the beginning. How much do you conduct the solo alto saxophone in the beginning of the first movement? There are basically three choices. One is to be pretty straightforward and 1, 2, and 1, and 2, and 1, and really truly conduct that solo and that soloist. A second way is to conduct, but kind of back off a little bit and let it more mark time rather than delineate time. So, dum ba da da dum ba da dum. So there's just a real slight and subtle marking of time that isn't necessarily dictating anything to the soloist, but is showing everybody else in the ensemble the importance of what's going on there. And so often our choices as a conductor are at least somewhat directed to and derived from the needs of those who are not playing. Coming from a tuba player, I know this to be true. Counting rests and knowing where your next entrance is sometimes the hardest part of being in a band or orchestra. The third way, I should say real quickly, is to do nothing at all. I'm not sure that's a very good choice for most groups. Perhaps if you have an exceptional alto saxophonist, that you almost want to treat this as though it's a cadenza or a recitative in that same style, that same spirit. The danger is, of course, what I just was talking about, is how do you make sure that everyone knows where 7 is? That clarinet entrance in the first clarinets at rehearsal 7 and subsequent entrances. So I wouldn't recommend this method unless you do this many, many times, perhaps do it in several performances or even on a tour of some kind, and really only unique circumstances. I present it as an option just as sort of a general choice, and I think as conductors we sometimes forget the wide variety of choices. And the second way is one that I would probably urge you to consider and to process and to think about as an option for you and your group and your needs. As the first movement progresses, what you need to be constantly monitoring, listening to, adjusting, thinking about weight and color, dynamics, balance. As the piece goes on, new voices are constantly coming in. The melody shifts from one instrument to another. And not only the melody, but some very, very interesting counter lines and counterparts come in. And then, of course, the background of most music, and certainly true of Cajun folk songs, especially once it gets going, are the long notes. And how do all those balance? If you want to take a look at rehearsal 50, everybody is marked either mezzo forte or mezzo piano. DeKelly does a great job of marking the moving parts mezzo forte and the softer parts, or the longer notes, as mezzo piano. But that doesn't mean that it's automatically going to happen. Be aware of those distinctions that the composer has basically put in there to say, this is what needs to happen anyway. Make sure that you're doing it and monitoring that as you go. Every setting, every measure, every phrase of this first movement has these kinds of choices, and you could spend countless rehearsals just simply modifying that and playing around with that, partly to explore what does happen if you bring out a particular voice, what does happen if you change things a little bit. It has to be tasteful, it has to be in the spirit of the piece, and it has to be in honor of the composer. But that said, there's some room to be flexible in this piece. So quickly moving on to the second movement, another set of choices. Sometimes conductors and teachers take liberties with composers' markings that are not always in the intent of what the composer had in mind. The beginning of the second movement is one where the composer himself has given you an option, even a suggestion. It's in 5/4, and if we did that according to just the general basic cookbook rules of conducting, it would simply be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, da 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 da. But Kelly himself, in the prefatory remarks to the score, has suggested that you actually think of it as a 4 pattern where the first 2 beats are 6/8 and the next 2 beats are 2/4. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and 4 and 1 and a 2 and a 3 and 4 and. And if you're not comfortable with this, it's pretty easy. Just think of the first 2 beats as a 6/8 and the next 2 beats as a 2/4. Put that on a basic 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 pattern, and you got it. Practice with a metronome. Set the subdivision so you're very, very clear and precise with da 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 1 and a 2 and a 3 and 4 and 1 and a 2 and a 3 and 4 and so forth. But in that context and in that spirit, it's worth saying it feels better that way. It might be a little more awkward for the students, especially if they're not used to playing in asymmetric meters and changing meters. But this piece gets them ready for changing meters and playing and thinking of the bell, the second movement in that context, I think is extremely helpful to letting the piece dance. And I think that's crucial to the overall success of the performance. As you move on, the transitions in the second movement, I think, are always worth spending some time on. Sometimes they're a little challenging because they're not always exactly intuitive. Again, I think that's what makes them interesting, and that's what makes the piece great and enjoyable and rewarding. But if you take a look at the first one of these examples that I might point out is getting into rehearsal 12. If you back up 2 bars, start at measure 10, you sort of have the tail end of the long note sustaining, and then second clarinet, second trumpet. Again, a great thing about this piece is that it's not just first parts getting all the interesting things to do, but second and third parts, where applicable, often have interesting things to do and unique things to do and exposed parts that they don't get a lot in music of this, again, a 3+ or a 4 grade level, whatever you want to call it. The point is, there's responsibility there that doesn't necessarily feel, again, intuitive the first time you do it. And then that 2/4 bar at the beginning of 12. So if you take it 2 before 12, it's just that da 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 da, or play around with those, but for sure take a look and be very, very careful and deliberate about 12 and 17 and 28 and all those types of transitions, especially the ones that begin with a 2/4. Kelly pretty much does them consistently, but that doesn't mean they're always the same. The instrumentation changes, the scoring changes, the context changes. Again, that's what great composers do. The next place I might encourage you to spend some time thinking about is a huge transition, starting at 74. The piece builds. You're spending more time in just a basic unchanging 3 pattern. I would personally strongly encourage you to stay in 3 here. Having said what we said about the composer giving you the option of conducting the 5/4 as though it's a 6/8 plus a 2/4, there are times where the 3/4s in this section might feel like 6/8. I believe they are 3/4, and I believe Frank Kelly would write them as 6/8 if that's the way he intended. There is a difference between 3/4 that includes syncopation on the end of 2 versus a 6/8. 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a is different than 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. Even though it might on the surface look the same, on the surface sound the same, as a musician you have to strive to hear how that feels different. And all music is a song or a dance, or at least most music is a song or a dance. And I think the Cajun folk songs, the first movement is a song, the second movement is a dance. The dance needs to sing, the song needs to dance, but the point is how those two things come together is really, really crucial. So these 3/4s, which you might be tempted to in some cases, and you could see measure 78, yet da 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 da, da 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 da. Feel free to wrestle with this yourself, because you could also conceivably make an argument that that's the same thing he's doing in the opening, where the composer has said you can do it as a 6/8. I just don't think that it works as well here, and I really do think that and of 2 needs to kick as opposed to being an accent of a compound 2. Then you have this transition into 88, a pretty big moment, and a bit of repose here before the last little push getting into the end that starts at 92. 92 is where we sort of regather everything. We have the material heard again and sounding again. Basically, this section, just spend a little time getting into 88, at these 4 measures at 88, how lyrical, how connected, how warm, dark, rich can you make the tenor saxophone, horn, and euphonium sound together. Again, it's this chorale, and I think that's worthy of some time and attention. And then 92, and you could really make an argument 92 to the end is really just the push that really culminates in an incredibly exciting ending of the piece. Of course, it's worth noting that the grand pause 3 from the end in measure 130 is very, very, very treacherous. And you have to be sure that as a conductor, you are absolutely aware of where it happens, how it comes in, and that as you bring the group to the end, it's authoritative, firm, and clear. And then the last two measures are really just about as straight ahead, fun, joyous, exuberant, da 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 da, as you can possibly make it and share it with your students and your audiences. I hope these comments have been of some help. I'm always happy to share thoughts and ideas and exchange comments about music. Feel free to contact me. Andrew.mast@lawrence.edu is a good way to reach me. And I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope you enjoy Frank DeKelly's Cajun folk songs.